G'day folks, Peter Stefanovic here. It's great to be with you. Could you imagine fearing for your life so much that clinging to a moving plane as it takes off from the runway is a better option than staying on the ground and living with the Taliban? The bodies falling from the sky this week was a harrowing and symbolic end to a 20-year war that started with a similar sight at the World Trade Center. The war in Afghanistan, at least in the beginning, was a success. The Taliban was beaten back and bin Laden was taken out. But then it dragged on and on without a long-term plan. So after 20 years, it had to end. Sadly, that always meant the Taliban would resurge and take over. They just had to wait it out. Which begs the question, what was the point in the end? I spoke to Tyson Sara this week, who's done 2 tours of Afghanistan, for his thoughts. Is there an element of troops valuing or questioning the value of their work and the sacrifice that they made in the end?
Absolutely. And I think, that's not just true for soldiers and those civilians, diplomats, aid workers, intelligence officers, etc., that went over there. I think it's true for their families as well. Everyone's family had an impact from this campaign if they had a loved one that served there. And the question of was it worth it, I think, will be ringing in the minds of many that served in Afghanistan.
Australia's part in the war was launched with bipartisan support. We had victims in New York. So Scott Morrison, our 6th Prime Minister to deal with the war, wouldn't call it a failure. The war in Afghanistan, Prime Minister, was it all a waste in the end?
It's always Australia's cause to fight for freedom. And whatever the result, whatever the outcomes of that, Australians have always stood up for that. And I think that's very important. That is always important. That's what we've always done, and that's why Australia is respected in the way we are.
It didn't achieve anything though, did it?
In Australia's uniform, everyone who has fallen in an Australian uniform for our values and under flag has died in the great cause of freedom, and they are great heroes.
No one is doubting our men and women were heroes on the battlefield. But what does this result mean for conflict in the future, particularly as China goads Taiwan? Can the US and its allies be trusted? Would the US and its allies even go to war again anytime soon? It's a concern for our former Army Chief, Lieutenant General Peter Lay. What do you think this means for any potential conflict going forward?
Well, I think we've got to be very careful about what we choose, who we choose, the type of the coalition we're in. And this coalition was over 60 people, and you're really not going to get a strategy out of that. You're just going to get something by way of consensus. So I think we have to be very deliberate. I'd also say I think we've got to be more focused on our region than far away places such as the Middle East. And we also need to make sure that we have thought about it very carefully. I'd like to see the greater involvement of the Parliament in decisions to go to war. And I'd also like to see a very regular consideration while we're at war of the Parliament and the Australian people.
The only winner here is the Taliban. They'd like us to believe that they've been rebranded, they've changed. Women and girls will be given rights under Sharia law. But does anyone believe them? I know I don't. See you next week.